A woman who was an orphan decides to help a homeless child and discovers something revealing about her true family. Please consider subscribing to the channel to support our projects. Emily had always known the confines of the orphanage walls, a stark reminder of the life she had been thrust into. She was a resilient woman of 35, shaped by the cold, impersonal system that had raised her. The orphanage, a sprawling, aged building with creaky wooden floors and drafty windows, had been her home for most of her life. She could still remember the long corridors and the way her footsteps echoed in the silence of the night, often mirroring her feelings of loneliness. From a young age, Emily had harbored a deep-seated hope of finding her real family. This hope had been her solace during many difficult nights, lying awake in the dimly lit dormitory, listening to the muffled sobs of other children who, like her, yearned for a place they truly belonged. The few possessions she had were neatly stored in a small, worn-out suitcase under her bed, each item a faint link to the past she had been denied. Her memories of the orphanage were a blend of harsh realities and fleeting moments of joy. She remembered the stern matron, Mrs. Hathaway, whose strict rules were softened by the occasional acts of kindness. The matron had once given Emily a small, tattered book of fairy tales. Emily cherished that book, not for the stories themselves, but for the notion that someone cared enough to give it to her. As Emily grew older, she became a mentor to the younger children, teaching them to read and helping them with their homework. She developed a reputation for her compassion and strength, traits that endeared her to both the staff and the other orphans. Despite her outward confidence, the question of her origins gnawed at her. The absence of any substantial leads on her family was a void she could never quite fill. Emily's life at the orphanage had been marked by a series of near adoptions that never quite worked out. Each time a potential family chose another child, her heart broke a little more, yet she never let it show. She had learned to mask her disappointment with a determined smile, vowing to be there for the others who needed her. Now, as an adult, Emily channeled her experiences into her work as an assistant social worker. Her days were spent in the company of children who mirrored her own past, and her nights were filled with the lingering questions of her own identity. Despite the lack of answers, Emily held on to a glimmer of hope, believing that one day she might uncover the truth about her origins and the family she had never known. Emily's days were filled with the challenges and triumphs of her role as an assistant social worker. From the moment she walked into the office each morning, she was immersed in the complex lives of the children she was determined to help. Her workspace was modest, a small cubicle adorned with drawings and thank you notes from children whose lives she had touched. These tokens of gratitude were a testament to the difference she made, small reminders of why she chose this path. Emily's understanding of the struggles these children faced was deeply personal. Each case she handled was a reflection of her own past, and this empathy drove her to go above and beyond in her efforts. She worked tirelessly to find safe homes for children in need, liaising with foster families, organizing school placements, and ensuring that each child had access to necessary medical care and counseling. Her dedication often meant late nights at the office and weekends spent visiting foster homes, but she never complained. To her, this was not just a job, it was a calling. The stories of the children she helped were often heart-wrenching. She encountered children who had been abandoned, those who had suffered from abuse, and others who had lost their parents under tragic circumstances. Emily's ability to connect with them, to listen and offer genuine support, made her an invaluable asset to her team. She was known for her compassionate nature and her unyielding resolve to secure better futures for these young lives. Emily's own experiences fueled her passion. She knew what it was like to feel lost and unwanted, and she was determined to ensure that no child under her care ever felt that way. Her approach was holistic. She understood that providing a roof over a child's head was just the beginning. She advocated for their emotional well-being, helping them build resilience and find hope in their situations. Whether it was through finding a mentor, organizing group therapy sessions, or simply offering a listening ear, Emily was always there, ready to support and uplift. Despite the emotional toll her work sometimes took on her, Emily found solace in the successes, no matter how small. Each child placed in a loving home, each smile she managed to coax from a once distrustful face, was a victory. These moments of joy were what kept her going, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always a glimmer of light. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the bustling city streets as Emily left the office. It had been another long day filled with the usual challenges, and she was looking forward to a quiet evening. As she walked towards the subway station, she noticed a small figure huddled near the entrance of a convenience store. Her pace slowed as she saw a young boy, around 8 years old, with tousled brown hair and dirt-smudged cheeks, holding out his hand to passers-by. Emily's heart ached at the sight. The boy's clothes were tattered, and his eyes, though wary, held a depth of sorrow that struck a familiar chord within her. She remembered all too well the feeling of being alone and scared, with no one to turn to. The memories of her own childhood flooded back, compelling her to approach him. "Hey there," she said softly, crouching down to his level. The boy looked up, startled, but did not run away. "What's your name?" "Jack," he mumbled, his voice barely audible over the noise of the street. "Hi, Jack. I'm Emily," she replied with a gentle smile. "Are you hungry?" Jack nodded hesitantly, his eyes flickering with a glimmer of hope. Emily reached into her bag and pulled out an apple and a granola bar, offering them to him. Jack took them with a muttered thanks and began to eat hungrily. As he ate, Emily sat down on the curb beside him, mindful of the passing pedestrians. "Do you have a place to stay, Jack?" she asked, her tone filled with concern. Jack shook his head, swallowing hard before speaking. "No, I sleep wherever I can." Emily's heart broke a little more at his words. "How long have you been on your own?" "A while," he replied, avoiding her gaze. "I ran away from a bad place." Emily nodded, understanding the unspoken details. She had encountered many children with similar stories in her line of work. She knew she had to help Jack, but she also knew that trust was something that had to be earned, especially with children who had been through so much. "Jack, I want to help you," she said sincerely. "I know a safe place where you can get a warm meal and a bed to sleep in. Would you come with me?" Jack hesitated, eyeing her cautiously. Emily could see the battle waging in his mind, fear versus hope. She waited patiently, offering a reassuring smile. After what felt like an eternity, Jack gave a small nod. "Okay." Emily stood up, extending her hand to him. "Let's go then. You'll be safe with me, I promise." Jack took her hand, and together they walked away from the busy street, leaving behind the cold reality of his current existence and stepping into a tentative new beginning. Emily brought Jack to a small, cozy diner near her apartment. The diner was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the chilly night outside. They slid into a booth by the window, and Emily ordered a hot meal for Jack. The waitress, a kind older woman, brought over a steaming plate of spaghetti and meatballs, along with a slice of apple pie for dessert. Jack's eyes widened at the sight of the food. He hesitated for a moment, then began to eat with a voracious hunger that spoke volumes about his recent hardships. Emily watched him with a mixture of sadness and relief, glad that she could provide him with some comfort, even if only for one night. As Jack ate, Emily gently began to ask him about his life. "Jack, do you want to tell me how you ended up on the streets?" Jack paused, looking up at her with cautious eyes. He swallowed his food and took a deep breath. "I ran away from the foster home," he said quietly. "It wasn't a good place. The people there, they weren't nice. They didn't care about us." Emily nodded, her heart aching at his words. She knew all too well the grim reality of some foster homes. "How long have you been on your own?" "Almost a year," Jack replied, his voice trembling slightly. "I try to find somewhere safe, but it's hard. People look at you like you're invisible, or worse, like you're nothing." Emily reached across the table and gently placed her hand on his. "I'm so sorry you've had to go through this, Jack, but you're not alone anymore. I'm here to help you." Jack looked down at his plate, the weight of her words sinking in. "I just want to feel safe," he whispered. "You will," Emily promised, her voice firm with determination. "Tonight, you can stay with me. We'll figure everything out in the morning." They finished their meal in companionable silence, the tension slowly easing from Jack's small frame. Emily paid the bill and led him to her apartment, a modest but welcoming space that she had filled with personal touches. She showed Jack to the spare bedroom, where a freshly made bed awaited him. As Jack settled in, Emily brought him a cup of hot cocoa. "Here, this will help you sleep," she said, handing it to him with a smile. Jack took the cup, his eyes softening with gratitude. "Thank you, Emily," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're welcome, Jack," she replied. "Get some rest. We'll talk more in the morning." As she closed the door to his room, Emily couldn't help but feel a deep sense of responsibility for the boy. She had no idea what the future held, but she was determined to do everything in her power to ensure that Jack would never have to feel alone and scared again. In the days that followed, Emily's life took on a new, richer texture. Her once quiet apartment was now alive with the sounds of Jack's laughter and the gentle hum of their daily activities. Every morning began with a simple but hearty breakfast. Emily would make pancakes or scrambled eggs, while Jack chatted about his dreams from the night before or asked questions about the world around him. These morning rituals, mundane as they might seem, were a source of immense comfort to both of them. After breakfast, Emily would accompany Jack to the park, a small but well-kept green space a few blocks from her apartment. The park was a haven for children, with swings, slides, and a wide grassy area perfect for running and playing. Jack, who had initially been hesitant and reserved, gradually began to open up. He made friends with a group of local kids, his laughter becoming a regular soundtrack to Emily's mornings. Emily often brought a book or some work to the park, but she found herself watching Jack more often than not. Seeing him play so freely, his face lit up with pure joy, brought tears to her eyes on more than one occasion. She realized how deeply she had come to care for him, how his well-being had become intertwined with her own happiness. Evenings were equally precious. After dinner, they would settle into a cozy routine. Emily introduced Jack to the wonders of reading, starting with simple stories and gradually moving to more complex tales. Jack's favorite was a book about a young adventurer who explored fantastical lands, a clear reflection of the boy's own yearning for discovery and belonging. Emily loved these moments, the two of them curled up on the couch, Jack's head resting against her shoulder as she read aloud. Their conversations, too, became more profound. Jack began to share bits and pieces of his past, the foster homes he had cycled through, and the sense of abandonment that had driven him to the streets. Emily listened intently, offering comfort and reassurance. She told him about her own childhood, the loneliness she had felt growing up in an orphanage, and how she had channeled her experiences into helping others. These shared stories created a deep emotional bond between them, a mutual understanding that words alone could not convey. Emily's resolve to keep Jack safe grew stronger with each passing day. She knew that their time together, as beautiful as it was, could be temporary if she didn't take action. She spent hours researching the legal processes involved in guardianship and reached out to her network for advice. She connected with a sympathetic lawyer who specialized in child welfare cases and began gathering the necessary documentation. The legal process was anything but straightforward. Emily faced numerous challenges, from proving her suitability as a guardian to navigating the complex bureaucracy of the child welfare system. There were moments of frustration and doubt, but she never let them deter her. Each night, after Jack had gone to bed, she would sit at her desk, poring over forms and legal texts, determined to understand every detail and to prepare for every eventuality. Emily's colleagues noticed the change in her, the added determination in her eyes, and the new sense of purpose that fueled her work. She confided in a few close friends about her decision to fight for Jack's guardianship, and they offered their support, helping her navigate the more intricate aspects of the process. Through it all, Emily's bond with Jack continued to deepen. She marveled at his resilience and the way he was slowly but surely reclaiming his childhood. She saw in him a reflection of her younger self, and it only strengthened her resolve to ensure that he would never feel the same abandonment and fear she had known. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Emily found herself looking at Jack as he slept, his face peaceful and his breathing steady. She felt a swell of emotion, a fierce protectiveness mingled with a profound love. She knew then, without a doubt, that she would do everything in her power to give Jack the life he deserved. She couldn't change the past for either of them, but she could fight for a better future. As the days turned into weeks, Emily's home transformed into a sanctuary of stability and love for Jack. The once quiet apartment was now filled with laughter, hope, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. One evening, after a particularly fun but messy day at the park, Emily decided that it was time for Jack to have a bath. The bathroom was filled with steam, the scent of lavender soap wafting through the air, creating a warm and calming atmosphere. Jack, still bubbling with the energy of the day's adventures, was splashing water and playing with a toy boat that Emily had bought for him. As she helped him rinse the suds from his hair, Emily noticed a glint of metal around his neck. Gently moving the collar of his shirt aside, she saw a small amulet hanging from a delicate chain. The amulet was old and worn, its edges smoothed by time, and it bore a strange symbol, a symbol that sent a shiver down Emily's spine. The symbol was intricate, a combination of lines and curves that seemed almost familiar. It stirred something deep in Emily's memory, a vague but persistent sense of recognition. She couldn't quite place it, but it felt connected to a distant part of her past, a part she had long since locked away. "Jack, where did you get this?" she asked softly, trying to keep her voice steady despite the rush of emotions. Jack looked down at the amulet and then back at Emily. "It was my mom's," he replied quietly, his playful demeanor momentarily subdued. "She gave it to me before I had to leave." Emily's heart ached at the sadness in his voice. She carefully held the amulet in her hand, examining it more closely. The symbol seemed almost like an emblem, something that might belong to a family crest or an ancient artifact. The familiarity of it gnawed at her, a whisper from her own past that she couldn't quite grasp. "Do you know what this symbol means?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Jack shook his head. "She said it was special, that it would keep me safe. That's all I know." Emily nodded, deep in thought. "It's very special indeed," she murmured, her mind racing. She decided then that she would need to find out more about the amulet and the symbol it bore. It felt too significant to ignore, and she had a feeling that it might be a crucial piece of the puzzle in understanding Jack's past, and perhaps even her own. After Jack was bathed and ready for bed, Emily sat by his side, reading him a bedtime story. But her thoughts kept drifting back to the amulet and the strange sense of déjà vu it had triggered. As Jack drifted off to sleep, Emily gently tucked the amulet back under his shirt, resolving to start her investigation the very next day. She knew that this discovery could lead to answers, not just for Jack, but potentially for herself as well. The symbol felt like a link between their lives, a connection that demanded to be explored. Emily's determination to uncover the truth about the amulet and its significance grew stronger, fueled by the desire to protect Jack and understand the mysterious threads that seemed to bind their fates together. The next day, Emily woke with a sense of purpose. After getting Jack ready for school and dropping him off, she made her way to a well-known antiquary in town. The shop, tucked away on a quiet side street, was filled with the musty scent of aged books and artifacts. Shelves overflowed with relics from different eras, each item holding stories of the past. Emily entered, the bell above the door jingling softly. The shop's owner, Mr. Harris, looked up from behind the counter. He was an elderly man with a kind face, his eyes twinkling with curiosity and wisdom. Emily had visited the shop a few times before, drawn by its historical treasures and the owner's extensive knowledge. "Good morning, Mr. Harris." She greeted him with a smile. "Good morning, Emily. What brings you here today?" he asked, adjusting his glasses. Emily pulled the amulet from her bag, the metal glinting under the shop's warm lighting. "I found this, and I was hoping you could help me identify the symbol," she said, handing it to him. Mr. Harris took the amulet carefully, his eyes narrowing as he examined the intricate design. He turned it over in his hands, his brow furrowing in concentration. After a few moments, he looked up, his expression a mix of intrigue and recognition. "This is quite interesting," he murmured. "The symbol is an emblem from an old family that used to live in this region. It's quite rare to come across something like this." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "Do you know which family it belonged to?" Mr. Harris shook his head slowly. "I can't say for certain without further research. The symbol is distinctive, though, and it points to a lineage that was once prominent here. Many old families had unique emblems, passed down through generations. It's possible this amulet has a story of its own." Emily leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean by a story of its own?" Mr. Harris smiled faintly. "Every artifact, especially one as personal as an amulet, carries a piece of history with it. The symbol suggests a connection to a family with deep roots in this area. I can look into my records and see if I can find more information. It might take some time, but I'm sure we can uncover more about its origins." Emily nodded, grateful for his help. "Thank you, Mr. Harris. Anything you can find would be incredibly helpful." "Of course, Emily," he replied warmly. "I'll start my research immediately. Feel free to check back in a few days." As she left the shop, Emily felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. The revelation about the amulet being tied to an old family was a tantalizing clue, but it also raised more questions. Who were these people, and what connection did they have to Jack, and possibly to herself? The answers seemed just out of reach, but Emily was determined to follow this lead, no matter where it took her. With a renewed sense of determination, she headed back to her apartment. She couldn't wait to share the news with Jack and let him know that they were one step closer to uncovering the mysteries of his past. Over the next few days, Emily found herself consumed by thoughts of the amulet and its mysterious symbol. Mr. Harris had promised to research it further, but Emily's own curiosity spurred her to dig into her past as well. She spent her evenings combing through old records and documents, trying to piece together any fragments of information about her brief adoption. One night, as Jack was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Emily sat at her desk, surrounded by papers. Her heart raced as she uncovered an old adoption document, yellowed with age. The name on the paper sent a shock through her system: the Reed family. It was the same name Mr. Harris had mentioned during their conversation about the amulet. Emily's mind raced as she tried to reconcile this new information with her memories. The Reed family had adopted her when she was a child, though she had been too young to remember the details clearly. All she knew was that the adoption had been short-lived, and she had been returned to the orphanage under mysterious circumstances. Seeing the name again brought back a flood of emotions: confusion, hurt, and a desperate need for answers. Determined to understand the connection, Emily dug deeper into the records. She discovered that the Reeds had been a prominent family in the region, known for their wealth and influence. The symbol on the amulet, she realized, was indeed their family crest. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but they also raised more questions. Why had the Reeds adopted her, only to return her? And how did Jack come to possess an amulet with their family emblem? The implications were staggering, and Emily felt a knot of anxiety form in her stomach. She knew she had to find out more about the Reeds and their connection to both her and Jack. Emily decided to visit the local archives the next day, hoping to find more comprehensive records about the Reed family. As she prepared for bed, she glanced at Jack, who was sleeping peacefully. She couldn't help but wonder how deeply their fates were intertwined. The discovery of the amulet and its emblem had set off a chain reaction of events that seemed to be leading her closer to the truth about her past. The next morning, after dropping Jack off at school, Emily headed to the archives with a sense of urgency. She requested all available records on the Reed family, including adoption papers, family histories, and any related documents. As she sifted through the information, a clearer picture began to emerge. The Reeds had been a significant part of the community, but their history was marked by both triumph and tragedy. Emily learned that the Reeds had suffered a great loss around the time she was adopted, an event that might have influenced their decision to return her to the orphanage. The specifics were still unclear, but the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together. Emily felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. She was on the brink of uncovering a truth that could change everything, but she also knew that the answers might be painful. As she left the archives, clutching the documents tightly, Emily's mind was a whirl with possibilities. The connection between her, Jack, and the Reed family was undeniable. She had to find a way to learn more about the circumstances of her adoption and why she had been returned. Most importantly, she needed to understand Jack's link to the Reeds and what it meant for both of their futures. Emily's determination led her back to the orphanage where she had spent her formative years. The building, with its imposing facade and worn brickwork, stood as a silent witness to her past. Stepping through its doors brought back a flood of memories, both bitter and sweet. She was greeted by Mrs. Thompson, the current matron, who remembered Emily from her time there. "Emily, it's been so long," Mrs. Thompson said warmly. "What brings you back here today?" Emily explained her situation, her discovery of the Reed family connection, and her need to understand why she had been returned to the orphanage. Mrs. Thompson listened attentively, nodding sympathetically. "I'll take you to the archives," she said. "We should have the records you need." The archives were housed in a dimly lit basement room, filled with rows of filing cabinets and boxes stacked high. Mrs. Thompson led Emily to a section marked Adoptions and pulled out a drawer labeled with the year Emily had been adopted and returned. The matron began sifting through the files, finally pulling out a thin, worn folder. "Here it is," Mrs. Thompson said, handing the folder to Emily. "This should have the information you're looking for." Emily sat at a nearby table, her hands trembling slightly as she opened the folder. The documents inside were yellowed with age, but still legible. She found the initial adoption papers from the Reed family, detailing their decision to adopt her and the subsequent return to the orphanage. As she read through the pages, her eyes were drawn to a particular entry, one that mentioned a security threat as the reason for her return. Her heart raced as she scanned the document for more details, but the explanation was frustratingly vague. The note referenced a threat to the Reed family that necessitated her return to the orphanage, but it lacked specifics. There were no names, no incidents, just a cryptic mention of a danger that had seemingly passed without further elaboration. "Mrs. Thompson," Emily called, her voice tinged with urgency. "This mentions a security threat, but there aren't many details. Do you know anything more about this?" Mrs. Thompson frowned, peering over Emily's shoulder at the document. I remember hearing about some trouble the Reeds had back then, but I was only a junior staff member at the time. The specifics were kept quiet, even from us. Emily sighed, feeling a mix of frustration and intrigue. The incomplete documentation was a dead end, but it also confirmed that something significant had happened, something that had forced the Reeds to return her to the orphanage for her safety. Is there anyone else who might know more about this? Emily asked, determined not to let this lead go cold. Mrs. Thompson thought for a moment. You might try talking to Mr. Reynolds. He was the head of the orphanage back then. He's retired now, but he still lives in town. He might remember more about the situation. Thanking Mrs. Thompson, Emily left the orphanage with a renewed sense of purpose. The mention of a security threat was a crucial piece of the puzzle, and she was determined to find out exactly what had happened. Her next step was to track down Mr. Reynolds and see if he could shed any light on the mysterious circumstances surrounding her return to the orphanage. As she walked away from the building that had been her home for so many years, Emily couldn't help but feel that she was on the verge of uncovering something significant, something that could explain not only her past, but also Jack's connection to the Reed family. Emily tracked down Mr. Reynolds, the former head of the orphanage, who was now living in a modest house on the outskirts of town. When she explained her quest, he welcomed her in with a knowing look. "Emily, I remember you well," he said, settling into his armchair. "The Reed family. Yes, that was a complicated situation. Mr. Reynolds revealed that during the time of her brief adoption, the Reeds had indeed faced a serious threat. However, there was something more he hadn't mentioned earlier. The Reeds had also experienced a devastating personal loss. Their young son, Henry, had gone missing under mysterious circumstances around the same time they adopted Emily. The boy's disappearance had been a tragedy that rocked the family to its core. Emily listened intently, her heart pounding. "So, the Reeds adopted me shortly after losing their son?" "Yes," Mr. Reynolds confirmed. "They thought having another child might help ease their pain, but the threats they faced made it impossible to keep you." This revelation added another layer to the mystery, but Emily still couldn't see how Jack fit into all of this. She thanked Mr. Reynolds and left, her mind racing with questions. Determined to find more answers, Emily intensified her research. She revisited the archives, combing through public records, old newspapers, and anything that could shed light on Henry's disappearance. Her efforts eventually led her to a private investigator who had worked on the case years ago. The investigator, intrigued by Emily's determination, agreed to help her dig deeper. After weeks of painstaking research, a breakthrough came. The investigator uncovered adoption records that showed Henry Reed had been found and adopted by another family shortly after his disappearance, but the records were incomplete and didn't provide a clear trail. However, DNA tests had been done when Henry was found, and those records were still accessible. Emily arranged for a DNA test for Jack, hoping against hope that it would provide the answers they needed. The results came back, confirming a shocking truth. Jack was indeed the biological son of Henry Reed, making him Emily's nephew. Emily sat in stunned silence as the realization sank in. Jack, the boy she had come to love as her own, was her blood relative. Her lost brother had a son, and fate had brought him into her life in the most unexpected way. The amulet, the symbol, the strange familiarity, it all made sense now. The pieces of the puzzle had finally fallen into place, revealing a connection that transcended time and circumstance. Tears filled Emily's eyes as she thought about the incredible journey that had led her to this moment. She now understood why she had felt such a strong bond with Jack from the very beginning. He was family, and she was more determined than ever to protect and cherish him. With the DNA test results confirming Jack's identity, Emily felt a renewed sense of urgency to reconnect with the surviving members of the Reed family. She contacted the private investigator once more, who helped her trace the current whereabouts of the Reeds. The search led them to a quiet suburban neighborhood, where Emily found the family living in a charming, well-kept house. Emily stood at the front door, her heart pounding with a mix of anxiety and hope. She took a deep breath and rang the bell. Moments later, the door opened to reveal an older woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. It was Mrs. Reed. "Hello," Emily began, her voice trembling slightly. "My name is Emily, and I think we need to talk about our connection." Mrs. Reed's eyes widened in surprise, and she quickly invited Emily inside. As they settled into the living room, Emily recounted her story, revealing the amulet, the DNA test, and the journey that had led her to their doorstep. Mrs. Reed listened intently, her expression shifting from curiosity to recognition and finally to tears. "We searched for you for so long," Mrs. Reed said, her voice choked with emotion. "We were told you had been adopted by another family, and all our attempts to find you were met with dead ends." Emily reached out to hold Mrs. Reed's hand. "I had no idea you were looking for me," she said softly. "I thought you had forgotten about me." Mrs. Reed shook her head vehemently. "Never. You were always in our hearts. We were devastated when we had to return you, and we never stopped trying to bring you back." Just then, Mr. Reed entered the room, his eyes widening as he saw Emily. Mrs. Reed quickly filled him in, and he, too, was overcome with emotion. The three of them embraced, the weight of years of separation and misunderstanding melting away in an instant. Over the next few hours, Emily learned more about the Reed side of the story. They had been misled by false information, making them believe that she had been adopted by another family. Their search for her had been relentless, but they were always a step behind due to the misinformation they had received. Emily then shared the news about Jack, revealing his identity as their grandson. The Reeds were stunned but overjoyed. They had lost their son, Henry, years ago, but now a piece of him had returned to them through Jack. It was a bittersweet revelation, but one that brought a sense of closure and new beginnings. The family reunion was filled with laughter, tears, and endless stories as they caught up on the lost years. Emily felt a profound sense of belonging and love that she had yearned for all her life. The Reeds welcomed her and Jack with open arms, and they spent the rest of the day making plans for the future, ensuring that their bond would never be broken again. As the day turned to evening, Emily watched Jack playing in the backyard with his newfound grandparents. She felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and peace. The journey had been long and arduous, but it had led her to a place she had always dreamed of, a family, reunited and stronger than ever. The days that followed the emotional reunion with the Reed family were filled with a sense of renewal and purpose. Emily knew that the next step was to make her guardianship of Jack official. The process, while complicated, was something she approached with unwavering determination. Emily met with her lawyer, who helped her navigate the legalities of the adoption. There were numerous forms to fill out, background checks to clear, and court dates to attend, but Emily faced each challenge head-on. The Reed family supported her throughout, providing the necessary documentation and vouching for her capability as a guardian. Their collective effort was a testament to the strength of their newly reformed bonds. Jack, meanwhile, was thriving in his new environment. The stability and love that surrounded him allowed him to flourish. He bonded deeply with his grandparents, who showered him with the affection they had longed to give their lost son. For the first time in his life, Jack experienced the warmth of an extended family, and it transformed him. One sunny afternoon, as Emily and Jack walked hand in hand to the courthouse for their final adoption hearing, Emily felt a mix of nerves and excitement. The courtroom was a formal, imposing space, but Emily's resolve remained strong. The judge, a stern but kind-faced woman, reviewed their case with meticulous care. After what felt like an eternity, she finally smiled and said, "Congratulations, Emily. The adoption is approved. Jack is now officially your son, Tears of joy streamed down Emily's face as she hugged Jack tightly. "We did it," she whispered to him, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. Jack grinned back at her, his eyes shining with happiness and relief. Their lives quickly settled into a harmonious rhythm. Emily, now officially Jack's mother, took great pride in nurturing him and guiding him through life. They continued to spend time with the Reed family, creating new traditions and cherishing every moment together. Holidays were particularly special, filled with laughter, shared meals, and the kind of familial love Emily had always dreamed of. Emily found a new purpose in her life. Her work as a social worker took on deeper meaning, as she now had a personal understanding of the importance of family and belonging. She advocated fiercely for the children she worked with, drawing from her own experiences and the journey she had taken with Jack. Her compassion and dedication made a tangible difference in the lives of many, and she became a respected figure in her field. Jack, too, blossomed. He excelled in school, made lasting friendships, and pursued hobbies with enthusiasm. The shadow of his past gradually faded, replaced by the confidence and security of knowing he was loved and valued. Emily encouraged his interests, whether it was joining the local soccer team or exploring his talent for drawing. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues, Emily reflected on their journey. She thought about the twists and turns, the heartache and the joy, and how each step had brought them to this moment. Jack leaned against her, his head resting on her shoulder. "Mom," he said softly, the words still new and wonderful to both of them, "I'm really happy we're a family." Emily smiled, her heart swelling with love. "Me too, Jack. Me too." In that quiet moment, surrounded by the beauty of the world and the love of her son, Emily finally felt at peace. Despite all the challenges they had faced, she knew they were exactly where they were meant to be. Together, they had found a new sense of family and purpose, and Emily understood that every step of their journey had led them to this perfect, cherished place.